Your grandmother could feed 6 people from a handful of cold potatoes and a bone the butcher was going to throw away. She did not need a recipe book. She did not need a Thermomix. She needed a sharp knife, a heavy pot, and the kind of knowledge that modern food writers now charge 40 quid a cookbook to teach you badly. Number 17 on this list was actually condemned by home economics teachers in the 1970s as unhygienic, but NHS nutritionists now say it reduces food waste better than any gadget on the market. And number 4 uses a trick so effective that ready meal companies quietly copied it and have been selling it back to us at 8 times the price ever since. These 25 recipes were passed between women over back fences and scribbled in the margins of ration books. They vanished because supermarkets needed you to forget them. Before we start, hit subscribe, because what your grandmother did with leftovers would put most professional kitchens to shame. Let us count them down. Number 25. Monday potato cakes. Every British kitchen had cold mashed potato on a Monday. It was the law of the Sunday roast. Your grandmother scooped out whatever was left, maybe 3 or 4 tablespoons, mixed it with a handful of plain flour and a pinch of salt, then shaped the lot into flat rounds the size of a digestive biscuit. Fried in a knob of dripping until golden on both sides, they came out crisp on the outside and pillowy soft within. The whole batch cost nothing. The potatoes were already paid for. The flour was pennies. The dripping came from the jar on the stove. Yet these little cakes turned leftover mash into something children actually fought over at the breakfast table. Some grandmothers added a grating of cheese or a spoonful of chopped spring onion if the garden had any. Others kept them plain, letting the golden crust do the talking. A plate of 6 took less than 10 minutes from bowl to table. Ministry of Food leaflets in 1947 actually promoted potato cakes as the ideal way to stretch the ration. They were right. No modern meal prep hack comes close to the simplicity of turning yesterday's leftovers into this morning's breakfast for a family of 6. Number 24. Bone broth soup. Long before Pret started charging £3.50 for a cup of bone broth, your grandmother was making it from scraps the butcher gave away for free. She would take the carcass from Sunday's chicken, or a beef marrow bone that cost maybe 4p, drop it into the biggest pot she owned with an onion, a carrot, and a bay leaf. Then she would simmer it for hours, sometimes the whole afternoon, until the liquid turned golden and the kitchen smelled like warmth itself. Monday's soup came from that stock. She would strain out the bones, pick off any remaining shreds of meat, and add whatever vegetables were tired but not yet gone. A soft carrot, half a turnip, the outer leaves of a cabbage, thickened with a handful of pearl barley. That pot fed 6 bowls easily. The whole meal cost less than a shilling in 1955, and the bones had already served their first purpose on Sunday. Nothing was wasted. Nothing was bought twice. The marrow melted into the broth, giving it a richness that no stock cube could match. This was not a recipe. It was a system. Every roast generated the next 3 meals automatically. Number 23. Bread and butter pudding from stale crusts. When the end of the loaf went hard, your grandmother did not throw it in the bin. She saw pudding. Stale bread slices were buttered, layered into a greased dish, and scattered with a handful of currants or sultanas. A custard of 2 eggs, a pint of milk, and 2 tablespoons of sugar was poured over the top. 30 minutes in a moderate oven, and the kitchen filled with the smell of nutmeg and caramelized sugar. The bread soaked up every drop of custard, turning soft and golden while the top layer crisped to a sweet, buttery crunch. A whole pudding for 6 cost maybe 9p in ingredients, using bread that would otherwise have been wasted. The Women's Institute held this up as the model of economy in their 1952 cookery pamphlets. Children scraped their bowls clean. Mothers served it with a jug of warm custard made from bird's powder. The genius was not just the taste, it was the principle. That stale bread was not rubbish. It was an ingredient waiting for its moment. Modern bakeries now sell bread pudding for £4 a slice. Your grandmother made it from scraps and fed the whole family. Number 22. Dripping toast soldiers. When the Sunday roast was carved and eaten, the roasting tin held a shallow pool of golden fat and dark, sticky meat juices. Your grandmother carefully poured that liquid through a piece of muslin into a ceramic jar, where it set into a pale amber spread with a dark jelly layer at the bottom. That jelly was concentrated flavor, pure essence of roast dinner. Monday morning, she would toast thick slices of bread, spread them with the dripping while it was still soft enough to knife, and cut them into soldiers for the children. The salty, beefy fat melted into the warm toast, and that dark jelly at the bottom of the jar was fought over by anyone old enough to know what it was. A week's worth of toast toppings from one Sunday joint that had already fed the family. Cost of the spread itself? Nothing. Zero. It was a byproduct. Yet it delivered more flavor than anything you could buy in a jar from the supermarket. The British Heart Foundation spent decades telling us this was dangerous. Recent research suggests the processed vegetable spreads we replaced it with were actually worse. Number 21. Bubble and squeak patties. Monday's leftover vegetables, cold-boiled cabbage, mashed potato, maybe a few soft carrots, all got mashed together in a bowl with a crack of pepper and shaped into thick patties. Fried in a little dripping or bacon fat until the outside formed a dark, almost burnt crust, while the inside stayed soft and steaming. The name came from the sound they made in the pan, bubbling and squeaking as the moisture hit the hot fat. A plate of 4 patties with a fried egg on top was a complete meal for 2 adults, and enough for the children to share. Total cost beyond what had already been served on Sunday. 1 egg. Perhaps tuppence. The trick was getting that crust dark enough. Too pale and they were just warm mush. Properly browned, they developed a savory depth that made the cabbage taste nothing like cabbage anymore. Whole families ran on this system. Roast on Sunday, bubble and squeak on Monday, soup from the bones on Tuesday. 3 meals from one shopping trip. No recipe book, no waste, just knowledge passed from mother to daughter. Number 20. Pea and ham soup from the Sunday bone. After the boiled bacon joint was carved to its last slice, the bone still had work to do. Your grandmother dropped it into a pot with a pound of dried split peas, an onion, and enough water to cover everything by 2 inches. Hours of gentle simmering turned that bone and those cheap dried peas into a soup so thick you could stand a spoon in it. The ham flavor seeped into every pea, and the marrow enriched the broth until it was almost creamy. 6 bowls from a bone that the butcher would have binned, and a bag of peas that cost 4p. Some grandmothers added a diced potato to thicken it further, or a handful of chopped mint from the garden for freshness. Served with doorstep slices of bread, it was a meal that kept miners going through a shift and children quiet through an afternoon. The bone might even go back in the pot for a second, thinner batch the next day. Nothing was finished with until it had given everything it had. Number 19. Cheese rind soup. This one sounds mad until you try it. When the block of cheddar was down to its hard, dried rind, your grandmother did not throw it away. She dropped it into whatever soup or stew was simmering on the hob. As the rind softened in the hot liquid, it released a concentrated, salty, umami flavor that enriched the whole pot. Italian grandmothers did this with Parmesan rinds, but British women were doing the same thing with cheddar and red Leicester decades before any food writer told them to. A rind that cost nothing, that was destined for the bin, turned a watery vegetable soup into something with real backbone. You could fish it out before serving or leave it in to dissolve completely. Either way, the soup tasted richer, deeper, more satisfying. Modern chefs now call this a flavor bomb and write about it in weekend supplements as though they invented it. Your grandmother just called it not being daft with food. Number 18. Bread sauce from stale loaf ends. When roast chicken appeared on the table, bread sauce sat beside it. Your grandmother made it from the heel ends of loaves that had gone too stale for sandwiches. She would stud a peeled onion with 3 or 4 cloves, simmer it gently in milk for 20 minutes until the kitchen smelled of warm spice, then stir in torn chunks of stale bread until the mixture thickened to a creamy porridge. A knob of butter, a pinch of salt, and a grating of nutmeg finished it. The bread dissolved into the seasoned milk, creating a sauce that was silky, fragrant, and utterly unlike anything you could buy in a packet. A Coleman's bread sauce mix cost more than making it from scraps, and tasted like cardboard by comparison. The whole batch cost perhaps 2p in ingredients that would otherwise have been wasted. Families who kept this tradition running knew that leftover bread was never really leftover. It was always on its way to becoming something else. First pattern break. Here is where the list takes a turn. Your grandmother did not just rescue leftovers. She actively planned for them. The Sunday roast was not one meal. It was a production line. The joint fed Sunday dinner. The cold cuts made Monday's sandwiches. The bone went into Tuesday's soup. The dripping spread across the week's toast. And the vegetable scraps became Wednesday's bubble and squeak. This was not accidental. This was a system engineered by women who could not afford to waste a single penny. Food economists at Sheffield University calculated in 2019 that the average post-war housewife wasted less than 3% of purchased food. Today, British households throw away nearly a third. We did not get busier, we got wasteful, and we forgot the system that made thrift automatic. Number 16. Leftover meat rissoles. When the roast was down to scraps too small for sandwiches, your grandmother put them through the mincer. That cast-iron hand grinder clamped to the kitchen table turned cold beef, lamb or pork into coarse mince in minutes. Mixed with mashed potato, a beaten egg, a spoonful of brown sauce and a shake of pepper, the mixture was shaped into rounds, rolled in breadcrumbs made from yet more stale bread, and fried until the coating turned golden and crunchy. 6 rissoles from meat that had already served its main purpose. The breadcrumb crust sealed in the moisture, and the brown sauce gave depth to meat that might otherwise have tasted tired. Children dipped them in tomato ketchup. Fathers had them with chips and pickled onions. The whole plate cost nothing beyond the egg and the fat for frying. Supermarkets now sell frozen rissoles for £2 a pack. Your grandmother made better ones for free. Number 15. Vegetable peel crisps. Potato peelings, carrot ribbons, parsnip shavings, all the bits that went into the compost or the bin. Your grandmother tossed them in a little dripping, spread them on a baking tray, and roasted them at high heat until they curled and crisped. Sprinkled with salt, they became snacks that children ate faster than anything from a packet. The potato skins crisped like proper crisps. The parsnip curls turned sweet and caramelized. The carrot ribbons went chewy and intense. A whole tray from peelings that cost absolutely nothing. This was dismissed as peasant food for decades. Now, high-end restaurants serve root vegetable crisps for £8 a bowl, and food waste campaigns beg us to use our peelings. Your grandmother did not need a campaign. She needed to feed 6 people, and she was not about to throw food in the bin when it could go in the oven. Number 14. Stale cake trifle. When the Victoria sponge went dry or the Madeira cake lost its freshness, your grandmother did not serve it apologetically. She turned it into trifle. Slices of stale cake were laid in the bottom of a glass bowl, soaked with whatever fruit juice was to hand, or a splash of sherry if the occasion called for it. A layer of tinned fruit cocktail went on top, then a thick blanket of bird's custard made stiffer than the packet suggested. Whipped cream or whipped evaporated milk crowned the whole thing, scattered with hundreds and thousands or a grating of chocolate. A pudding that looked like celebration, built entirely from things that were past their best. The stale cake actually worked better than fresh because it absorbed the juice without collapsing. The custard set firmer against the dense sponge. Every layer earned its place precisely because it was not at its peak anymore. This was your grandmother's genius. She did not see stale food. She saw ingredients for the next course. Number 13. Potato peel broth. During and after rationing, nothing was too humble for the pot. Potato peelings were simmered with an onion skin, a few peppercorns, and a pinch of salt to make a thin but surprisingly flavorful broth. It tasted earthy and clean, like the ghost of a proper stock. Used as the base for gravy or thinned soup, it stretched meals one step further at zero cost. The starch from the peelings gave body to the liquid, thickening it naturally. A trick learned in the hardest years and kept by women who never forgot how close hunger had come to their door. Number 12. Cold meat and pickle sandwiches for 6. The simplest entry on this list, but perhaps the most important. Monday's lunch was always cold roast carved thin, layered onto buttered bread with Branston pickle or piccalilli. A joint that cost perhaps 5 shillings on Saturday fed Sunday dinner for the family, and then became Monday and Tuesday lunches without a single extra penny spent. The pickle was the clever bit. Its sharpness cut through the cold fat and made even the driest slice of meat taste intentional. Children carried these sandwiches to school wrapped in greaseproof paper. Fathers took them to the factory in snap tins. The same joint, serving the same family 3 days running, and nobody complained because the pickle made it different each time. Second pattern break. Controversy incoming. Here is the entry that gets people arguing. Your grandmother did not just stretch leftovers, she stretched time. A pressure cooker could take a scrap end of beef, the cheap cut that cost barely a shilling, and make it tender in 40 minutes instead of 4 hours. She could start the meal after the children came home from school and have it on the table before the 6 o'clock news. That steam did something science would later confirm. The Maillard reaction, the browning that creates deep flavor, happens faster under pressure, so cheap cuts developed a richness that slow roasting could never match in the same time. The prestige pressure cooker cost £3 and lasted 30 years. We replaced it with microwaves that cost 10 times as much and made everything taste like damp cardboard. The pressure cooker is coming back now. Trendy food writers rave about the Instant Pot as though it is a revolution. Your grandmother is somewhere shaking her head. Number 10. Bread pudding from leftover loaves. Not bread and butter pudding, bread pudding. The dense, spiced slab that appeared at church fetes and WI meetings and tasted like Christmas cake's working-class cousin. Your grandmother soaked stale bread in water until it collapsed, then squeezed it dry and mixed the pulp with suet, mixed dried fruit, brown sugar, mixed spice, and a beaten egg. Pressed into a tin and baked until the top turned dark and sticky. It emerged dense enough to slice into fingers and sweet enough to serve as pudding or pack into lunchboxes. A whole tray cost perhaps 1 shilling in ingredients, most of which were leftovers or pantry staples. It lasted a week without refrigeration, getting stickier and better with each passing day. School tuck shops sold slices for a penny each. The WI judged competitions on whose was best. Modern bakeries charge £3 for a single square. Your grandmother made a tray that fed 6 from bread she would have otherwise thrown to the birds. Number 9. Leftover gravy on toast. When Sunday's gravy was too good to throw away, your grandmother poured the leftover into a cup and kept it in the cold larder. Reheated gently the next day and ladled over thick toast, it became a meal in itself. The gravy had set overnight into a wobbly jelly, concentrated and rich with meat juices. Warmed through, it loosened into a glossy, intense sauce that soaked into the bread and made the whole kitchen smell like roast dinner all over again. Some grandmothers added a splash of Worcestershire sauce to freshen it. Others stirred in a scraping of mustard. Either way, a meal that cost nothing beyond the bread appeared on the table in 5 minutes, and children ate it without a single complaint. We throw away leftover gravy now. We pour it down the sink. Then we spend £2 on Bisto granules the following week to make a version that is not half as good. Number 8. Bacon bone and cabbage soup. When the bacon was finished, the bone went into the pot. Your grandmother simmered it with a whole shredded cabbage, a diced potato, and an onion until the cabbage turned silky and the broth tasted deeply of smoky pork. The potato dissolved into the liquid, thickening it naturally, while the cabbage gave sweetness and body. A huge pot from ingredients that were either free or cost pennies. Served with bread, it was a complete supper. The bacon bone flavored the soup so thoroughly that you would swear there was meat in every spoonful, even though the bone had already given everything to Sunday's joint. This was the final act in the bacon bone's long career, and it was perhaps the best performance of all. Number 7. Dripping pastry. When your grandmother made a pie, she did not buy butter or lard. She used the dripping jar. Beef dripping rubbed into flour with cold fingers produced a pastry that was short, flaky, and deeply savory. Perfect for meat pies, perfect for topping a leftover stew, and it cost nothing because the fat had already been paid for with the roast. The flavor was incomparable. Modern short crust made with margarine tastes flat by comparison. Dripping pastry had a golden color and a richness that made even the simplest filling taste like something worth sitting down for. Your grandmother could top a pie dish of leftover stew with this pastry, and suddenly, Wednesday night felt like Sunday again. Number 6. Scrap end stew. The end of the week meant the larder was nearly bare. Your grandmother would gather whatever was left. A soft carrot, half an onion going brown, a single potato, a handful of pearl barley, perhaps a scrap of leftover meat. Everything went into the pot with water or leftover stock and simmered until it became a thick filling stew. No recipe existed for this because it was different every time. The only rule was nothing got wasted. Barley thickened the broth and made it hearty. The long, slow simmer coaxed flavor from ingredients that individually had nothing left to give. Together, they became something greater than their parts. 6 bowls from what amounted to the contents of the compost bin. This was not cooking. This was alchemy. Number 5. Fried leftover pudding. When rice pudding or semolina sat firm overnight in the dish, your grandmother sliced it into thick pieces and fried them in butter until both sides turned golden and crisp. The soft, creamy interior stayed warm and yielding, while the outside developed a caramelized crunch. Sprinkled with sugar or drizzled with golden syrup, fried leftover pudding turned yesterday's dessert into today's breakfast or tea. Children preferred it to the original. Something about the contrast between crisp and creamy made it irresistible. A second meal from a pudding that had already served its purpose, costing nothing but a knob of butter and 2 minutes at the stove. Number 4. Shepherd's pie from Sunday's lamb. This is the one the ready meal companies copied. When the roast lamb was picked clean, your grandmother put every scrap through the mincer, fried it with onion and a splash of leftover gravy, and spread it in a dish. Cold mashed potato from Sunday went on top, roughed up with a fork so the peaks would crisp. 30 minutes in a hot oven, and you had a golden, bubbling pie that tasted better than the original roast because all those flavors had concentrated. The gravy had reduced, the meat had intensified, the potato crust had gone crunchy and golden. A complete second meal for 6 from the remains of the first, costing nothing extra. Supermarkets now sell frozen shepherd's pies for £3 that contain less meat than your grandmother put in a single portion. She made a feast from leftovers. They make a product from a factory. The difference is obvious to anyone who has tasted both. Number 3. Chip pan bread. When the chip pan oil reached the end of its useful life, some grandmothers used the last of it for a batch of fried bread. Thick slices went into the hot fat and emerged golden, crispy, and deeply savory from the flavor the oil had absorbed over weeks of frying chips, fish, and whatever else had passed through the pan. Served with a fried egg and a cup of tea, it was a breakfast that used the very last resource the kitchen had to offer before the oil was changed. Nothing was wasted, not even the fat. Number 2. Vegetable water gravy. The water left from boiling vegetables was never poured down the sink. Your grandmother saved it in a jug and used it as the base for gravy, adding a crumbled OXO cube or a spoonful of Marmite and thickening with a paste of flour and dripping. That vegetable water contained minerals, vitamins, and a subtle sweetness that made the gravy taste deeper and more complex than anything made with plain water from the tap. A gravy that cost nothing extra because the liquid was already there. We pour liters of flavored, nutritious cooking water down the drain every week. Your grandmother would be horrified. And number 1, the everything soup. At the top of this list sits the dish that defined a generation of British cooking, the soup pot that never emptied. Your grandmother kept a pot on the back of the stove or in the bottom oven of the Aga, and every scrap of leftover vegetable, every bone, every crust, every peel went in. It simmered gently, evolving day by day, topped up with water and whatever the week produced. Monday's potato peelings joined Tuesday's carrot tops. Wednesday's bacon rind met Thursday's cabbage core. By Friday, that pot contained a broth so layered and complex that no single recipe could ever reproduce it. It was the ultimate expression of the principle these 25 entries share. That leftovers are not waste. They are the beginning of the next meal. Your grandmother fed 6 people on what we throw in the bin, and she did it better than most of us cook from fresh. The everything soup was not a recipe, it was a philosophy. And we lost it when we decided that food comes from a shop, not from a kitchen. Try one of these this week. The potato cakes, the bone broth, the dripping toast. Then come back and tell me your grandmother was wrong. Share which one you are going to try in the comments, because these were never just recipes. They were a way of life that saved money, saved food, and fed families on almost nothing. Your grandmother knew. Now you know too.